Chapter 55. I was reflecting the other day about different jobs or occupations that I've had over my working life, and made me sort of think that when you were a young kid, who sort of had that thing where someone would say to you, you might be 8 or 10 years old or whatever, and someone would say to you, what do you want to do when you grow up? And people remember that. And it might have been, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a policeman, a nurse, a doctor, perhaps a school teacher. For some of us it could have been what our parents did. And I think at that time, when I was probably 16 or 17, I wanted to be an aircraft engineer. I obviously didn't make it. It's probably just as well for a lot of people, actually. But I spent my whole life of working life of nearly 49 years in a variety of different employment aspects in the automotive industry, as probably most of you know. Not necessarily working with my hands on that, but different things. I was an apprentice. I was just a parts delivery driver, a parts person, a manager, a production person, and then eventually owned my own business. So there was a whole gamut of things over a period of all those years. I think I worked out I only ever worked for 4 employers, but in that you have a whole series of different jobs. And in Isaiah 55, and we're going to start in verse 1 here, and it says, Ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye to the waters, and he that hath no money, come ye buy and eat. Yea, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Sounds pretty good. Wherefore do you spend money for that which is not bread, and you labour for that which satisfieth not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delighteth itself in fatness. Now, certainly as I've got older, the fatness certainly comes. A bit of a worry, really. In the Bible, we read of many different crafts or skills or jobs that people had, and there was keepers of sheep, just to name a few of them, tillers of the ground, bakers, boat builders, brickmakers, carpenters, coppersmiths, engravers, fishermen, goldsmiths, masons, needlework, potters, and we could go on, tanners, tent makers and weavers. And there was lots and lots of different skills or abilities that have been mentioned in the scriptures. And I suppose some of these people in those days, in the main, they would have followed their father's tradition or whatever it might be. We could put housewives in there because that's a big job in itself. If we go back to where I started, what are you going to do when you grow up? Perhaps you wanted to be a pilot. Is there anybody here who wanted to be a pilot? Someone? Is it a good idea, John, that you weren't or not? No? You would have been a good pilot, I'm sure. I was recently looking through a book that had been given to me, and it was about the Apollo missions. And I'm just going to give a few details here about an American astronaut called James Benson Irwin. And he was born in March the 17th, 1930, and he died in August the 8th, 1991. And he was an aeronautical engineer, a test pilot, and a United States Air Force pilot. So he had quite a few different things that he'd done over a period of time. It's only a bit of a brief thing about him. He served as the Apollo lunar module pilot for Apollo 15, and on the 4th human lunar landing. So that was the 4th time that they actually went to the moon. He was the 8th person to walk on the moon on July 31 in 1971. And when we think about this is a pretty incredible thing, because out of all mankind, there was only ever 12 people that ever walked on the moon. And he was one of that 12. And so you think of the billions or trillions and trillions of people that have existed, and of course a lot of them have been in different ages. But how would you be if you were one of the 12 people that no one else had ever done that? What an experience that would be. The first was obviously Neil Armstrong on July 20, 1969, and the old question is, where were you on that day? I think I was at high school when they played it on a black and white TV, because that's all we had. Irwin described his experience in the Apollo 15 lunar mission. He said, "I felt the power of God as I'd never felt it before." He said, "The Earth reminded us of a Christmas tree ornament hanging in the blackness of space, and as we got farther and farther away, it diminished in size. Finally, it shrank to the size of a marble, but the most beautiful marble you can imagine. That beautiful, warm, living object looked so fragile, so delicate that if you touched it with a finger, it would crumble and fall apart. Seeing this has to change a man, has to make a man appreciate the creation of God and the love of God." Quite incredible words. It must be the day of the Irish today, because James Irwin was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but he was of Scottish and Irish descent. And I really pondered about this for some time. He may have been a relative of Pastor Chris, or Pastor Chris may have been a relative of him. And perhaps John Irwin, or Johnny Irwin, who wasn't here today, but he could have been related to him. He's got the same name, and the mind boggles. But this man here, when he was asked, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" at the age of 12, he informed his mother about his desire to go to the moon. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in naval science, United States Naval Academy in 1951, a Master of Science, Aeronautical Engineering and Instrumentation Engineering from the University of Michigan. During his military service, he accounted more than 7,000 flying hours, of which 5,300 were in a jet aircraft. So he had masses and masses of experience in that particular field. Irwin was raised in a Christian household, but stopped actively practicing the religion at age 10. He became a devout, born-again Christian after returning from space. And I won't get into that because I don't know anything about that further, but obviously it changed his approach to the way he's seen things. He was one of the 19 astronauts selected by NASA in April 1966. He was chosen as a commander with this John Ball on the lunar module pilot. He then served as a member of the astronaut support crew for Apollo 10 and the first mission to carry out the full Apollo stack to the moon and a dry run for the first crewed moon landing. So this was all his experience leading to this time. Following that assignment, Irwin served as a backup lunar module pilot for the second moon landing mission, Apollo 12. So an experience that none of you or I will ever know or comprehend or really have any feelings about, and probably none of us are in the clever category in a natural sense that you have to be there. But the crucial thing is here that I want to bring out today is that he later stated, so this is the one man out of 12 people have walked on the moon. And this man later stated that Jesus walking on the earth is more important than man walking on the moon. Now that's pretty incredible. We can't comprehend what he's seen, but we can comprehend what he said. We all can be dedicated to our work or passions, make great achievements in this life, do a lot of things, go to a lot of places. We can get rich and buy whatever we want and be consumed by our own environment. But having the Lord in our life, I think, is the most important one of all. Those other things do help us and guide us and probably give us an insight, help us talk to people. But that one was the most important. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 25. Matthew 25 and verse 14 here. And it's a parable that Jesus spoke, and it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man travelling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightforward took his journey." It's an interesting one where it says several ability, because what that really means is various abilities. I'm not saying I was good at what I did, but I had various abilities throughout my working life of what I've done. this astronaut, he had various abilities in his working life of what he'd done. And you and I, whether we've brought up family or no matter what we have done, those duties that we've performed have also given us several abilities. And so we read in this parable that the Lord gave different numbers of talents to people according to their abilities. The word talent, if we look it up in the Old Testament, it was really like a balance or a scale, and then it became a weight, which then becomes sort of like a measure of gold or silver, and so it was equivalent to a talent of weight or money. In the New Testament, it really refers to a sum of money, which is written here. And when I looked into a dictionary called the Vine Dictionary, it said that the talent denoted something weighed has provided the meaning of the English word as a gift or ability, especially under the influence of the parable of the talents, which we've just read. So, that's what we're talking about, where it says here several ability or various abilities, which we fall into this sort of terminology here. My thoughts here today are really referring to this talent or skill or ability as something that we are capable of or are sufficient in what we do. Let's read on in Matthew 25 and just look in verse 16. And then it said, "Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that hath received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that hath received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoned with him. And so he that had received the 5 talents come and bore other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them another 5 talents. And his Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, and I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. He also that received 2 talents come and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside me. And his Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, and I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. And then verse 24, Then he had which received the 1 talent come and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. And lo, there hast thou that is mine. And his Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knew that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore hast put my money to the exchanges, and then at thy coming I should have received my own usury. Take therefore that talent from him, and give it unto those which has 10 talents. And we can look at this, and I sort of see that what this is talking about is that when we are baptised and Spirit-filled, like we've buried our old way of life in the waters of baptism, we're Spirit-filled and now we're new creatures. But over the course of our life, young or old, we have gathered many experiences which then can be used in the Lord. And it doesn't mean we have to be clever. Some here are lots cleverer than others. Some here have lots more talents and abilities and different things that they can do than other people. But all of us have some talent. All of us really have an obligation to do something with it. And when we look at that, the word usury, it's to bring forth or with interest. And I sort of think about it that it's who knows what compound interest is. Compound interest really is that you invest a sum of money, and the interest you gain from that goes back into the pot as such, and then that gains more interest on that money. And I sort of think that really that the Lord is looking for compound interest from us. Sure, things change over our lifespan in our age. I'm allowed to make all these excuses now. But sure, our circumstances change from when we're in our 20s and 30s and 40s and so on. But our experiences change. We still always have something to offer. It may be in the conversation that we have. It may be in our experiences that we have. There's just so many different things where we still have that talent, and the Lord is expecting the compound interest on that. You know, we think about this man Irwin, and today I'm remembering not particularly because he was the 8th man to walk on the moon, but I'm really remembering him because he said Jesus walking on the earth is more important than walking on the moon. And we're using his skills and abilities really to highlight a point of just how important it was that Jesus come here for us. He didn't keep it to himself or bury his thoughts. He used the opportunity that had been given to really offer praise unto the Lord. And it's the same with us, is that, you know, once we receive the Spirit, we can't go and bury that light under a bushel. We can't sort of hide it away from everyone. We really need to be able to display it in some way or form. There's no condemnation, just as well, or otherwise I'd be in big trouble. I don't know whether you've ever sat next to me when I sing, but it ain't that good. And there's plenty of other things that I struggle with in life. Some of those you might know and some of those that you don't. But the thing is, there's still something there. It may be saying hello to someone. It may be picking up, you know, a mop bucket or a rag. There's still something that all of us have to offer, and we don't want to be caught out that we have this talent and we've hidden it away that no one can see it, and then all of a sudden we're in trouble. We're going to turn to Genesis in chapter 2. Something we've read quite a few times. We're going to look in Genesis 2 and verse 15 here, initially. And it says, "And the Lord God took the man, Adam, and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayst freely eat. And in verse 17, But the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." And then we turn over to Genesis 3, and in verse 1, and we read, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall she touch it." We know that she added that, "lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die." And we know he added that. In verse 5, "For God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, and your eyes shall be opened, you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and also gave some unto her husband with her, and he did eat." Now, it's an interesting thing here, because it really didn't take much temptation for Eve to yield. You know, like we sort of, I know it's only in the early days there in the chapters of Genesis, and I don't know what the time frame is, but really the devil or the serpent didn't say hardly anything to her, and all of a sudden she's decided, I want that. I know, and in her heart she must have known, but the Lord told me not to have it. I've got everything here. She had everything laid on. She didn't need to go and buy groceries. She had no power bills or council rates, no car or petrol bills. She had no mobile phone, or she had no mobile social media to contend with. You get my drift. She didn't really have a lot going on there. She didn't have a lot of the things that we contend with, and admittedly she didn't have the Holy Spirit either, but we still get the drift that she didn't have a lot to contend with. And it didn't take much persuasion that all of a sudden she succumbed to the charm of the serpent's temptation. But as well, Adam didn't take much either, did he? His wife said, Here, let's do this, and he just followed her. So neither of them really had much of an idea what was going on. They had everything laid on for them, but they didn't actually value it. And those consequences that they did, they've been passed on to generations since then and to us. We can relate to this story because really our life, it warns us just how easy that we can be caught out. So easy to to get caught out, a little bit at a time. She might have seen that serpent wiggle around and it was friendly. And then it done something else and it was always friendly. So it could have been that eventually when the serpent spoke to her, she's seen them as a friend rather than seen him for what it really was. It was subtle in that approach. You know, it's interesting, Paul writes in Corinthians, to the Corinthian church, and he says, "But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." And Eve's surroundings and Adam and Eve's surroundings were very simple, but they were sufficient. And they were tempted with something they didn't have, but they didn't need. And that's that Christ coming to the Lord, being baptised and Spirit-filled, is such a simple thing. But it's something that we struggle with so much. And then we keep looking and looking. In Galatians 1 verse 6, and I just read this, it's sort of one of my favourite stories. I think it always sorts out the sheep from the goats. Paul writes, "I marvel, or am amazed, that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another or a different gospel." The word "soon removed" could be interpreted as a turncoat, a deserter. And then he goes on, "which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert or change the gospel of Christ." So we come many, many years down the track, and then Paul's still concerned and still thinking of this same situation with Adam and Eve, and he's warning the people. He's warned the Corinthians in one way, and he's seen where people have got trapped out in another way in Galatians 6. The things that he's seen there, they still apply to us today. There's still someone or something that is trying to catch us. It's a bit of a problem. Now, I've got a question here. Has anyone heard the fridge magnet proverb, "Chocolate is the answer, and who cares what the question is"? Now, I have that magnet. It sits in my office. We didn't on the fridge. I warn you now, don't be fooled. It isn't true, and it's been one of my downfalls for years, and I'm still trying to overcome. But it does sound pretty appealing. I am a bit of a chocolate fan. And we were talking about a little bit over there, in fact I seen Colin there the other day, who can endure the temptation of Bunnings? Particularly for men, I think, but not only. Especially that tool department. You go in there and there's just racks of all these things that I'm sure I need. And it's full of rows that you know, if it's not the tool department, there's all these other things that I'm sure that when I get home, June's going to be really impressed that I've spent all this money and I can do all these jobs. But they're just traps that lure our money away from us. A little story that when I owned my business, I would often come home and say to Jean, "I've seen this piece of equipment. It's the latest thing, and everybody will want to have it and be using it in the future." Happened quite often, and she'd say, and I'd say to her, "I want to buy it, and it will cost X number of dollars." The thing I'm thinking of, I'm not going to say how much it was, but it was a fair bit of money. And June would say to me, "But do you really need it? Is it important?" And then I'd have to admit, well, not really. So one time she caved in and she said, "Okay." And I'd gone to this trade night thing, and there was this expensive piece of equipment, and I think they sold 6 of them on that night that I was there. Like, it was a lot of dough. And the main reason I bought this was actually when we had it installed and all the rest of it, I think that was the part that it was its failure. So I'd got sort of caught out. I partly financed it and partly paid for it myself, and then I had this deal. It was a lease, and at the end of that lease, or towards the end of that lease, if you notified this leasing company between 6 months before the end of the lease and 3 months, you could buy it at the end of the lease for $1. Now, if you think about this, there's a lot in this. So it's not that. What would make common sense is at the end of the lease, you paid $1 for it. That's common sense. But not this one. You had to notify them between 6 and 3 months that you wanted to buy it, and then you could buy it for $1. Now, I was a pretty meticulous person. I had different means where I would remember all this stuff and you would make notes, but I forgot to do that. And so at the end of that term, they come and they said, we've got you. They were full. We've caught you. You fell into the trap that we set. And no matter what we'd done, when we talked to them, they wouldn't change their mind, and it cost me another heap of money. And you know, this thing that happened to me, my life experience, reminds me of Eve, that the serpent said to her, this is all great and this is all good, but when she partook of it, it cost her, and it cost her big time, and it cost a lot of other people after that. And that's sort of what, I suppose, you know, it only cost June and me that. But, you know, we went to all this trouble, but what I realised in the end is that it started to consume me. It started to, you were trying to think of how I can get around it. I even rang the ACCC and spoke to them. You know, we went to a lot of trouble, but I couldn't really get out of it. They wouldn't move, and the contract was 40 pages, and you can't get around all that stuff. So in the end, we just paid them out. Because by paying them out, it was just cut it off. It was like, in a way, you know, if I offend thee, pluck it out. Well, we're not going to do that. But this was consuming me, so we just paid them out. And it hurt us, but we got over it because the Lord blessed us. But I stopped thinking about it. It stopped consuming with me because I just got rid of it. Sometimes we experience things in our walk that we just need to cut out of our life. We trust in the Lord and He blesses us. And I've got a thing here, don't let the tree of knowledge in modern world cut us out of God's creation, cut us out of creation of God's plan. You know, I often think about the desire of Eve for that tree of knowledge of good and evil. The world today is all about knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. And then in the end, that knowledge, I think this is what is one of the contributors to the atheistic approach that people have in the world, because they start to see that they are more important, that they know more things and there couldn't possibly be a creator. But they only, really what happens is they only touch the tip of the iceberg. In everything they do, they have all the computers, they have all the equipment, they have thousands and thousands of scientists with millions of hours put into it to discover one little thing that the Lord created in the beginning. But what happens in their own minds, they think they're cleverer and clever, and in the end they say, we don't need God. We're cleverer than God. That's just my thought. We need to ensure that some of our skills and energy that we've earned in our working life is continually directed to the things of the Lord. That we take opportunities to be involved, to talk to those inside and outside of our fellowship, to show the hope and strength that the Lord has bestowed upon us. You know, I've since I retired, I probably get up in the morning and I open up Apple News, because we never bought newspapers, and you just get into that thing. You've got plenty of time. And what I had really found was that then I would start reading things, and some of them were quite good, but you don't read very far, or there's something there that you realise is not actually good for you. And then there becomes more and more of those sorts of things. It could be about any particular subject, because there's so many subjects there, but you realise that a lot of these things aren't good for you. And the Lord sort of works on us by, he sort of pricks our heart, doesn't he? You know, you feel uncomfortable about something. It could be what you're watching on TV, or it could be the radio station you listen to. It could be a whole host of things, but you just realise that they're not good for you. And the more you listen to them, or the more you watch them, the more you just become more used to it. And then you keep watching it because it doesn't seem as bad, or keep listening to it because it doesn't seem as bad as what you initially thought. It's sort of like swearing. You know, when I first came to the Lord, someone would swear and your ears would really prick up. And after a while, if you're in a workplace, it slowly dissipates that you don't take as much notice. And I think that's often that's what happened to me, and I'm sort of thinking about it, and what can catch us out is things like what we look at, what we listen to. We won't go into it, but what we smell sometimes can have an effect on us. And then we get our thoughts, and then we get our imaginations and our desires and our feelings, and then we might get an adrenaline or a sensation. It could be any one of those things, and they can all catch us out. Unless we nip it in the bud, sometimes we've got to do again, just like it was back with Eve, just like we've spoken about other things, that sometimes we've just got to take control of that and saying, I'm going to stop looking. I'm going to stop listening. I'm going to have a mechanism that I put into place so that I'm not getting entangled in these things. I'm going to turn that TV, that program off because it's had a couple of words in it that ain't good, and if it's got a couple in it that ain't good, they're going to keep going that way. If you watch a movie or something, they're not always wholesome unto us. I know it's easier said than done, but they're all things that we work on. Years ago, I think we were in Brisbane, there was 5 of us, and we went to a movie, which was a PG-rated movie, so it was pretty tame. And I think we watched 10 minutes of it, and then the whole 5 of us, we just got up and walked out because of the language or whatever the innuendo wasn't right for us. And we could feel pressured to stay there, but we got up and walked out. The Lord made us feel uncomfortable about it, and we could do something about it, and we did. And so these things that I'm talking about that with the Apple News, it's something I still work on. There's other things that in your life. Each one's got things in their own life that they're not always the best things, but we keep working on it. And then we sort of have our little daily prayer, and it can be, Lord, strengthen my faith. I should have perhaps read more today. Help me do that. I haven't been praying enough. Help me do that. I shouldn't have had that thought or listened to that conversation. I don't really need that. Help me get around that. And a little thing that I learnt years and years ago, and I'm still trying to utilise it, but it's not to let our thinking put us down, because often that can be a great hindrance to our walk. I'm already over time now. We'll just finish off, and we're going to turn to Colossians in chapter 3. Colossians 3 and verse 15. And it says here, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also you are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts unto the Lord. And in verse 17, and whatsoever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Let's make sure that we don't hide our light under a bushel, our talent, our ability, the things that we can do. We can't bury our talent. We've got to remember that the Lord always makes an escape for us. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And all the people said. We'll hand back to Ben.